The world needs more energy. You know it, I know it, we all know it, including our friend here, Mr. Trump. Russia and China have been way ahead of the game for some time now. That doesn't make Mr. Trump too happy. And so what's next? What kind of energy are we talking about? Why are we talking about energy? Let's take a look. Listen, at this point, we could talk about this all day. We all know that data centers require a lot of energy. You can see that data centers dedicated to AI, large language models, are set to take 4% of all energy sales across the entire globe by 2027, and that number is sharply growing. So who knows what's next? All we do know is that we need more energy. Data centers alone in 2023 required and used more energy than all of France, a country with over 68 million people. And that number's expected to nearly triple by 2030, basically demanding more energy than every other country in the world. So what's the plan? How are we going to meet these absurd energy demands that are only going one way, and that's up and up fast? Well, there's a lot of ways to meet this demand, and I'm not going to dive into each one of these energy sources, but I made a whole video deep diving into all the best energy sources and why, essentially a tier list here. If you're interested, check it out. But in short, over the long term, almost everybody agrees that fossil fuels are not sustainable, so get rid of your coal, get rid of your oil. We will keep natural gas for now. And for something as large and as energy demanding, energy hungry as an AI data center is, we need high reliability. So your solar and your wind aren't going to be good options either, because the sun's only out for about 25 to 50% of the time. Wind isn't always blowing, and you need battery systems to make these more effective, which are expensive. Geothermal and hydropower are too reliant on location and geological factors. Natural gas is great, extremely reliable, but again, too dirty for the long term, so we'll cross that one out for now. And you can see, what are we left with? Well, you could probably tell from the first slide where we're going with this, but yeah, that's right, nuclear energy. So today we're going to focus on nuclear energy. How have countries like Russia and China gotten so far ahead of a country like the United States in this area? And what's next? Why is Trump so antsy, so ambitious in getting new nuclear power facilities built out over the coming decades? Nuclear is very clean, very reliable, and hence makes for the best and most feasible energy source right now. Nuclear fusion is going to be the best source, most likely in the coming years, but that's still pretty far away. So if we're going to focus on nuclear energy, that's a problem, and Trump knows it. Countries like Russia and China have been operating the full stack of nuclear energy for years, for decades, while the United States stopped development at one point and now is decades behind. It's good to know here that the United States actually has the highest nuclear capacity out of any country in the world and is generating the most electricity from nuclear energy. So what is this chart telling us? Why is the United States so far behind, decades behind countries like Russia and China? Well, that comes down to this chart right here, uranium enrichment capacity. Now you can see Europe, Russia, China. What's missing from this chart? Yep, that's the United States. That's this other category. 1% of the global uranium enrichment capacity. What does that mean? Why does that matter? Nuclear fission, the process we use in today's nuclear power plants, relies on uranium. Uranium-235 to be exact. This ugly black rock. Now, it's actually not that simple because uranium-235 on its own doesn't contain enough potency, enough potential energy to actually cause the chain reactions that are needed to provide the nuclear energy we're talking about today. This element, uranium-235, needs to be enriched. It needs to be more potent. How do we do that? Well, it's a process called uranium enrichment. Now, it doesn't actually look like this beautiful, shiny, powerful rock in reality, but I feel for this example, it paints a better picture. This ugly black rock to this beautiful gemstone that seems to have a lot of energy. I think you get the point. In order to have enough energy to cause these chain reactions, which in turn generates this nuclear energy, we need this new, shiny uranium. This enriched uranium. This is the uranium we throw into that nuclear reactor, and boom, we have our electricity. But I think you might have picked up on, well, the United States doesn't have uranium enrichment capacity, meaning they don't enrich uranium. If they don't enrich uranium, how are they going to get electricity. That's the moat. That's the competitive advantage that Russia and China have been building out for decades now. They have such a vast control over this market, which in turn makes the United States extremely reliant on them as trading partners to actually get this enriched uranium. Now, again, you might say, well, why don't we just build out uranium enrichment facilities right now? We're getting there. It's not that simple. The United States gets pretty much all of their uranium, their enriched uranium, from Russia and China. However, under the Biden administration in May of 2024, the United States signed into law the Prohibiting Russian Uranium Imports Act, which basically cut off all uranium imports from Russia. And again, there's always ways around this. Countries will find roundabout ways to get around this ban. So yeah, maybe it's not going directly to the United States anymore, but I'm sure it's being shipped out to one country, shipped out to the next, and then eventually ends up in the United States. But I think you get the point. The idea is that the United States is extremely reliant on Russia to provide them with the fuel that makes their nuclear power plants run and provide electricity. If you become too reliant on a certain country, a certain supply of something, you become very vulnerable to exactly what Russia did following this ban. In a tit-for-tat move, or eye for eye, Russia temporarily banned export of enriched uranium to the United States through the end of 2025. Does this really mean much because the US already banned imports of it? I mean, not really. But what it does take away is the United States leverage. Now they don't even have the ability to import enriched uranium directly from Russia, even if they wanted to lift this ban. And that's a problem when the United States imports, as we hinted at earlier, 99% of their uranium from other countries. So they're in a little bit of a pickle. Mr. Trump isn't happy. How are we going to max out the usage of these very expensive nuclear facilities that we have built if we can't even get the fuel, the enriched uranium, to actually run them and produce electricity? So just know when the United States is tooting their horns about increasing nuclear energy capacity through executive orders and whatever else, remember that means total available capacity. All of the power you could be producing if your nuclear facility was running 24/7, 365 days a year. But remember, to operate these facilities, we need this big, beautiful rock. And what's ironic about all of this, taking in the fact that the United States imports virtually 99% of its enriched uranium from other countries. Yet the Biden administration had a goal of tripling nuclear capacity by 2050. Pretty counterintuitive when you're really building out capacity for some energy, but you don't even have the raw materials. You don't even have the ability to enrich uranium on your own. And if that wasn't ironic enough, Trump is actually even more optimistic than the Biden administration. And I mean, after all, we all know Trump and Putin are just the best of friends, and Trump would have 100% prevented the Russia-Ukraine war if he was in office. Anyways, as we just mentioned, Trump is even more optimistic than Mr. Biden was. He's wielding his power. He's signing executive orders left and right that are all super important, of course. Trump used his power to sign 4 executive orders back to back to back to back, essentially trying to cut all the red tape that it takes to build out nuclear energy capacity, to build these new nuclear facilities. And one of them in particular has set a target of quadrupling US nuclear capacity to 400 gigawatts by 2050. Quadrupling US nuclear energy capacity. And let's be honest, in order to make use of that quadrupled nuclear energy capacity, which is very optimistic, the United States desperately needs to get their hands on more of this stuff. Domestic production of this stuff. The United States cannot afford to rely on China and Russia for the vast majority of their enriched uranium supply. At the end of the day, as we talked about, Russia and China have created this massive gap over decades and decades of uranium enrichment build out, and now the United States is paying the consequences. Nuclear energy has been chosen, rightfully so, as the gold standard for energy production right now. And so the US is scrambling to catch up, to get rid of this massive supply bottleneck for all this good stuff over here. And this isn't just Fugazi. Big tech companies all over the place for that matter, are scrambling to throw around this buzzword, this little phrase that everybody loves, carbon neutral, all over their websites, all over their products. And to be able to claim carbon neutral products, companies need to rely on clean energy, which we just talked about. Nuclear energy is a golden standard for that right now. Again, big tech companies want to flex this. They want to show off their carbon neutral status. They're completely lying to you. This is complete BS. They're not telling you the truth. They're just greenwashing to get people to feel good that they're not hurting the environment. It's a load of crap. I'll probably cover this in a video soon. But anyways, who's set to benefit the most from this? We have the US basically set to quadruple their nuclear energy capacity by 2050, and Trump pushing extremely hard with executive orders left and right. And well, the biggest beneficiaries, as you might expect from a very simple analysis, from a very high level of all the things we just talked about, would be to invest in the companies that are building out these nuclear energy facilities. The government is not only making it easier to do so, but you could see how, like under the Biden administration just a few years ago, there were tax credits and a lot of subsidies given to companies that were building out solar energy capacity. So you could likely see a similar dynamic with nuclear capacity going forward. And two of the companies in prime position to take advantage of this new trend are Constellation, CEG, and Vistra, VST, the companies with the most nuclear generation capacity in the United States. There are others, but these are at least my two favorites, probably the highest upside. One, they have the early mover advantage. They were two of the quickest companies to get onto the scene. Vistra also has a competitive advantage in nuclear facility build out. They build a lot of their components in-house, which saves a lot of money long term, especially when you move down that crazy supply chain that goes with building out a huge new nuclear facility. They have that rapport, that reliability factor, where they've been on the scene. They've been the biggest companies providing electricity from nuclear generation. So again, companies, people have come to rely on them. They have a proven product, and that's why they make the most sense right now. A more nuanced approach to who might benefit would call for some more innovation. Something that would help cut into that barrier that we discussed earlier in the video, with China and Russia pretty much owning the entire uranium enrichment market and the US relying heavily on their supply. That's a problem a company like Oklo hopes to solve with their small modular nuclear power plants, essentially allowing them to intake less enriched uranium as fuel as opposed to the big commercial nuclear power plants that we're used to today. Hopefully that would reduce that reliance on China and Russia as the United States tries to start building out those uranium enrichment facilities. And with less enriched fuel, that also saves money down the line. Oklo's also working on some of the most innovative and biggest plans when it comes to nuclear waste recycling that we've seen to date, which, if you didn't know, is a massive problem in the nuclear community. So this all sounds great. The problem is Oklo is, well, priced to perfection, maybe even better than perfection. The company generates no revenue. Yep, they don't have a product that sells yet. They continue to spend a shit ton of money, and they're not even expected to sell anything until 2027, yet the company's worth $10.7 billion. I think you can start to see just how much hype is surrounding the nuclear industry right now. And I think rightfully so, especially for those conventional power plants that we talked about and the companies like Vistra and Constellation. But these newer technologies, yes, there's promise and there's definitely a lot of hopium around them, but to value a company at $11 billion with a product that's not completely proven yet and a company that hasn't sold a damn thing, that's pretty dicey. A fair valuation of the company would value it at roughly $2.5 billion, and that's roughly 77% below today's levels. To each their own. If you see the massive upside, which there certainly is here, props to you. It's definitely a very high risk but high reward opportunity. And as I mentioned briefly earlier in the video, the nuclear energy that we think of today is nuclear fission, but by no means is nuclear fission a perfect source of generating electricity. There's far better ways to do it, far more optimal, and far more theoretically perfect energy sources. Again, I go into that in a whole lot more detail in this video here. That video has a ton of good information, took a ton of time to put together, so go check it out if you're interested. Essentially a tier list of all forms of energy that we have today, and even considering sci-fi types of energy like black holes. But at the end of the day, what do you think the deal is with nuclear? How much longer is the United States going to be at the mercy of Russia and China, two countries that the United States doesn't mesh too well with, but they need this big, beautiful rock right here. They need this rock to take advantage of the nuclear energy wave. And if you rely too much on these countries, well, then you may be in some trouble when Putin comes over and shuts the whole operation down. Let me know what you think. Are there some innovations out there that we didn't cover here? What do you think of Trump's Pokemon collection? This executive order was pretty crazy. As always, thank you for watching, and I guess I'll see you in the next one. Peace!